Tomorrow marks the 13th anniversary of the catastrophic September 11 terrorist attacks that drastically changed not only individual lives but world politics. All these years later, with billions of dollars spent on the war on terror, including 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we're told Australia faces a potent new terror threat. Today, there were 9 raids in southeast Queensland and police arrested and charged 2 men with offences including funding and recruiting for terrorism. At the same time, the Immigration Minister, Scott Morrison, announced new security measures at airports, and ASIO is considering raising the official terrorism threat level. In a moment, Mr Morrison joins me, but first, Madeline Morris reports on the credibility of the terror threat facing Australians.
Today, members of the Brisbane Joint Counter-Terrorism Team have executed 9 search warrants in Logan and southern suburbs of Brisbane.
The government's paranoid. They're making the people of Australia paranoid. That's all I've got to say.
Current Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, ISIL propaganda and talk is of continuing to conduct terrorist attacks in the West, including in Australia. So we do have to be concerned.
Hot on the heels of the outgoing head of ASIO warning Australia could soon be on a high terror alert, today 9 police raids took place in Brisbane and Logan.
The operation today involved approximately 180 members of the Queensland and Australian Federal Police. The search warrants were a culmination of a 12-month investigation by the Brisbane Joint Counter-Terrorism Teams under the operation name Bolton.
2 men have been arrested. They are 21-year-old Agim Krutzi and Omar Sakaria, seen here promoting his bookshop, which was a focus of today's raids.
We've got books of hadith and all different scriptures.
Sakaria is a brother of Ahmed Sakaria, also known as Abu Azma al-Australi, the man suspected of being Australia's first suicide bomber in Syria.
هذا رسالة لكل الأخوة في الدنيا إنه اليوم فرض الجهاد فرض عين على كل مسلم يقدر يحمل سلاح يأتي إلى أرض الجهاد.
The 2 men are variously facing charges of funding and recruiting for Jabhat al-Nusra, a branch of Al-Qaeda in Syria, as well as planning to go to the war-torn country. The raids coincided with the ramped-up national security message coming from the Immigration Minister today.
The young Australians who now either engage directly or provide material support to the extremist terrorist violence of ISIL are our citizens. They come from our suburbs. They come from our communities and they were born in this country.
Scott Morrison was announcing an extra $50 million to monitor people leaving the country, aimed at catching potential fighters before they make it to the Middle East.
We think well over 12,000, perhaps by now 15,000 and rising foreign fighters have flooded into, first of all, Syria, then across the border, many of them to join with Islamic State in Iraq. Of those foreign fighters, a good 1/4 come from Western democracies. Many of them will go home, and at least a sizable portion won't be able to leave well alone. They won't go back to normal life. They want to carry on fighting.
At least 60 Australians are believed to be currently fighting in Syria and Iraq. They include convicted terrorist Khalid Sharoof, accompanied by his sons, and Mohammed Ali Bariale, revealed by 7:30 on Monday to be the key intermediary for Australians travelling to the front line.
Islam means sincerity and submission to the one true God, and Muslim is the slave of God.
More than 20 jihadis are thought to have returned home, posing a major challenge for Australian security forces, according to policing experts.
The reality is that to do a proper monitoring job of a person, you would have to follow them, see what they do, and that would require at least 2 surveillance teams, because you'd have to work around the clock. Now, this is absolutely impossible when you're talking about these amount of numbers. So the only monitoring that they can do will be, I guess, things like social media and phones.
And the threat isn't only from fighters returning to Australia.
Saudara-saudara kalian dari Indonesia yang bergabung dan berada di Daulah Islamiyah
Last month, Islamic State's social media wing put out a recruitment video for Indonesian fighters.
Semoga Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala memuliakan kalian.
Any potential Indonesian returnees could also pose a threat to Australian citizens, says terror scholar Greg Barton.
I think for Australia, the involvement of Indonesians, but also Malaysians, people from the Philippines, elsewhere in the Islamic State movement in Iraq, Syria, is very worrying. At the beginning of this year, we would have said there's hardly any Southeast Asians fighting with ISIS. Today, it's clear that there are hundreds of Southeast Asians. And if Australians are injured or killed as a direct result of the Islamic State, it's most likely to happen, I think, in future in Southeast Asia.
What they are doing here in Australia.
Last night on 7:30, the outgoing head of ASIO revealed he's poised to raise Australia's terror threat to high.
Would you consider elevating that level within the next few days before you leave?
It's something that we in ASIO are actively considering.
In practical terms, it's massive. Electricity treatments. Ministers may have to have their security reviewed. Diplomats may have to have their security reviewed. Places. So iconic buildings in Australia will have to have their security reviewed, as well as the critical national infrastructure, which could include things like water sewage treatments or electricity treatments.
But with the threat, a note of caution from one of Australia's foremost terror experts.
The key to our response is not to turn angry and not to do things which give credence to the narrative of the jihadi groups. If we indiscriminately talk about the problem with Islam and the problem with Muslims, it just makes their recruiting very much easier.
Madeline Morris reporting.